He's a nerdy guy who, after getting ripped, conquers all the girls at school in a story that proves society is exactly as shallow as you think it is. Everything begins one morning when Masamune looks at his hot body in the mirror with the confidence of someone whose face has unlimited credit in the genetic lottery. Suddenly, his sister Chinatsu sees this narcissistic display and points out he's being superficial, which is rich coming from someone who judges people daily. But Masamune insists this had to be done to prevent him from going back to being fat and ugly like some kind of reverse Captain America transformation. At that moment, his mini-mom calls him for breakfast, but when Masamune sees her food has enough grease to cause a stroke just from looking at it, he decides not to eat because apparently cholesterol is his arch nemesis. Afterward, he goes to school, where all the girls stare at him like he's a limited edition collectible, proving you can't be considered human if you're not attractive in high school hierarchies. When he stops to inspire the girls by playing tennis like some kind of athletic god, some of them leave furiously after he accidentally hits a nerd with glasses, while Masamune escapes unpunished because pretty privilege is absolutely real. Suddenly, one of the girls recognizes him as a new transfer student. So the other girls gather around him and surround him with attention like he's distributing free money. Satisfied with this worship, Masamune activates his charm offensive and tells them to keep working hard while he walks away like the main character he believes he is. Later, Masamune notices a crowd gathering while one of the hottest guys at school makes a love declaration to the one they call the cruel princess named Aki, which sounds like a terrible anime title. There, Aki reveals that the wannabe Chris Hemsworth had recently purchased a book about gender swap fiction and was writing his own story with himself as the main character, which is honestly concerning behavior. Hearing this revelation, the students recoil in second-hand embarrassment. But while the poor guy tries to explain himself desperately, Aki adds that he has a single hair growing from the mole on his chest and nicknames him Mole Sauce, completely crushing any pride he once possessed in front of everyone. Seeing this brutal rejection, Masamune worries about how savage the school trenches are when Aki suddenly passes by and gives him a death glare that could freeze hell itself. Later in class, the class representative Tai reprimands Masamune for sleeping during lessons, but since he's handsome, he escapes punishment as usual because attractive people live by different rules. At that moment, a classmate called Shuri enters and hands him some bread for lunch thoughtfully. However, when Masamune sees the calorie count printed on the packaging, he realizes he'd have to do 100 sit-ups at home to burn it off, which sounds exhausting. Shuri compliments Masamune for being versatile, but not snobbish. So Masamune thanks him while remembering that Shuri is also quite popular with a group that calls him the designated passive, whatever that means. However, Shuri points out there's one person just as talented as him at school, building up the mystery. At that exact moment, Aki enters looking for a certain student who probably regrets existing. When nobody responds to her question, she pulls Masamune by his tie and demands an answer like she's interrogating a suspect. The lovesick fool in question identifies himself nervously, so Aki tosses his love letter back at him and criticizes him for being a creep with no social awareness. She then nicknames him Jabba the Hutt and tears his letter along with his dignity into tiny pieces while everyone watches the massacre. When she leaves after this public execution, Shuri explains that Aki is equal to Masamune in talent, except her personality stinks worse than his gym socks after a marathon. Tai then adds that she hates boys and gives them cruel nicknames when they confess to her, which is why they call her the cruel princess in a title she's definitely earned. When she mentions Aki as the daughter of the Atagaki group, Masamune instantly recognizes the name and runs to the hallway, realizing he finally found his arch enemy from childhood. Later at lunch, Aki receives a ton of desserts from her followers like tribute to a queen while Masamune observes her to gather intelligence for his revenge plot. He wonders how Aki isn't hated by the girls too, despite being cruel to everyone, but Shuri explains that most of them think she's cool because she's direct and honest, though Aki is always accompanied by her loyal servant Yoshino, the airhead, who does everything she commands. Masamune asks if Shuri has more information about his target, but the only thing he knows is that she likes to have lunch alone, which is suspicious behavior. At that moment, Aki walks away from the group, and Masamune observes while she sends Yoshino to run an errand like a personal assistant. Masamune plans to investigate why she eats alone secretly, but Shuri warns he might get screwed worse than Drake if he's caught stalking her. Masamune insists he'll be fine and runs off to search for Aki throughout the school building. Unfortunately, after searching the entire campus like a detective, he can't find her anywhere because she's apparently a ninja. At that moment, he sees Yoshino carrying food and remembers she's Aki's bag carrier. When she sees him looking very suspicious lurking around, he decides to follow her discreetly and they end up at the gymnasium storage room like it's a spy mission. Masamune eavesdrops while Yoshino presents lunch to Aki politely. But when a mop falls in front of him making noise, he gets startled and gives himself away like an amateur. Masamune apologizes for showing all the warning signs of a stalker, explaining he had no idea Aki would be there hiding. He then notices her concerning meal of ridiculously high calories, but assures her it's no big deal after seeing the empty food trays everywhere and realizing this is a binge-eating session. When Aki's stomach growls loudly, she quickly explains she can't help being a greedy pig, and since doctors haven't found any parasites living inside her, she simply has to keep eating constantly to survive. Masamune tries to leave this awkward situation, so Aki warns him that if he tells anyone about this secret, he'll regret it for the rest of his life. From then on, it seemed Masamune was the only boy capable of approaching the thorny queen herself without getting destroyed. One day during volleyball practice, Shuri comments on how friendly he got with Aki surprisingly fast, and how everyone thinks the cruel princess might actually give in this time to someone. However, Masamune explains that Aki actually rejected all his advances rudely and was mean to him like she is to everyone else. At that moment, Masamune sees Aki through the window and wonders how she manages to stuff so much food into such a small hole without exploding. But when she catches him staring creepily, she tells him to go back to his doghouse. Suddenly, the volleyball hits Masamune right in the head hard, and while the girls gather to see if he's okay, some frustrated loser whispers to him not to get ahead of himself because jealousy is real. After school ends, Aki and Yoshino say goodbye to their other friends. Then Aki asks Yoshino to get more food for her because her appetite is endless. Yoshino obeys and runs off quickly, leaving Aki alone and vulnerable. When she starts taking too long to return, Aki plans to check what happened to her when she encounters the pudding prince who's still bitter about rejection. Enraged, he grabs her hair violently and accuses her of accepting Masamune just because he's handsome, which is technically true, but still inappropriate. He then pulls out a pair of scissors to teach her a lesson like a psychopath, so Aki closes her eyes expecting the worst outcome. But when she opens them, Masamune is right there stopping the scissors with his bare hands like an action hero, making the pudding prince flee in terror. Masamune makes sure Aki is okay after that traumatic experience. He imagines that Aki couldn't possibly be mean to him now that she knows her secret, and he saved her from getting a terrible haircut. At that moment, Masamune remembered how he used to look like a walking airship and was bullied mercilessly for it by everyone. Back then, Aki was practically Masamune's savior from bullies until he confessed his love and she called him pig's foot, in the cruelest rejection possible. Since then, Masamune has deeply hated Aki with burning passion, which is why he now plans to do everything to make her fall in love with him completely, just so he can reject her brutally and get his revenge. The next day at school, Masamune approaches the pudding prince, who apologizes for hurting his hand during the scissors incident. Masamune accepts the apology and goes to his locker, but when he opens it, a note falls out calling him pig's foot, bringing back traumatic memories. Later in class, Masamune tries to figure out who could have sent the letter threatening to expose him. He concludes it can't be Aki since she likes to mock her victims publicly for maximum humiliation, but he can't think of other suspects who would know. Shuri and Tai ask if he's okay, so Masamune assures them he's fine, when suddenly he hears some students talking about pig's foot at lunch, which almost causes him to have a heart attack from panic. At that moment, Masamune swears to never relive that dark time of his past again, thinking that if the truth comes out about his transformation, everyone will treat him like a cursed object that should be avoided. Later in class, the teacher catches Masamune distracted again by his thoughts, so he sheds a tear and says he was just so emotional about the history lesson, which is obviously a lie. After class ends, Masamune remembers how he had to change his name. After 8 years of torture he suffered from his grandfather to lose weight through extreme training. He worries all his efforts will be in vain if he doesn't find out who sent the letter exposing him, when suddenly he sees a crowd of starving students running to the school store like there's a sale. At that moment, Yoshino desperately approaches and tries to push through the crowd to buy something to eat for Aki, but she's pushed back roughly and ends up showing Masamune her full moon accidentally. Masamune goes to check on her, so Yoshino claims she's dead now from embarrassment and hands Aki's food list to Masamune for him to complete the mission. Masamune agrees to help and manages to push through the crowd to grab the food items successfully. Then Yoshino takes her time counting the bread packages to ensure they're correct for her master. When she tries to leave, Masamune asks if he can go with her to see Aki, but Yoshino tries to flee, causing Masamune to pin her against the wall dramatically. When Yoshino starts crying from the pressure, Masamune backs off and tries to explain his intentions aren't creepy. Afterward, they go to the storage room, and Masamune realizes Yoshino is like Cinderella being mistreated by her evil stepmother Aki, except she signed up for this job voluntarily. Yoshino goes to the storage room to deliver the food, and when Aki starts eating her sandwich ravenously, Yoshino leaves to buy tea. Masamune then enters the room and says he's just passing by to see how she's doing, but gets his answer when he sees the empty plates stacked high. Aki asks how his hand is healing, so Masamune poses and says it's only burning a little bit, trying to look cool. Aki says she didn't plan to involve him in her problems and can barely look him in the eyes, so Masamune concludes she couldn't be the person who sent the pig's foot letter after all. At that moment, Yoshino returns and trips over nothing, showing her butt cheek again, so Aki gets startled and almost pokes Masamune's eyes out with her fingers. After Yoshino serves the drink to Aki, she hands one to Masamune too, who's surprised by her kindness finally. Aki laments that Yoshino is too humble and shouldn't be so kind to everyone, so Masamune stares at her like she just called anime cartoons in a serious offense. Masamune agrees that even he can't be kind to everyone realistically, but when Aki asks what that's supposed to mean, Masamune says he wants her to trust him more than she trusts Yoshino, which is bold. When Masamune leaves the storage room, he imagines Aki must be blushing red right now, which means his plan is working perfectly according to his manga research. He learned all his seduction techniques from cheesy romance manga and planned to continue with his master plan. Later on the way home from school, Masamune fell into a trap and was captured by Yoshino, who asked if he was trying to get revenge on Aki for calling him pig's foot years ago. Suddenly, Masamune remembers his photo with Aki from childhood and realizes Yoshino was in the background witnessing everything. Yoshino then drops a bomb while explaining her family has served Aki's family for generations loyally. Masamune realizes he's been caught red-handed in his revenge scheme, so he tells Yoshino to laugh if she wants, but he insists he doesn't regret trying to give Aki a taste of her own medicine. To his surprise, Yoshino tells him to continue and offers to help him with his revenge plot. The next day, Masamune observes Aki and her minions again suspiciously, so he decides he can't trust Yoshino completely since she might be leading him into a trap. He then plans to become friends and get Aki's email on his own without help. At that moment, Tae runs over to check if he's still having difficulty adapting to school life, so Masamune decides to help her with her task so he can practice asking for emails. However, when he sees she has no contacts saved on her phone, Masamune's confidence drops to zero, and he runs back to class embarrassed. There, he asks Shuri if sharing email addresses means the other person will discover the number of contacts they have saved. Shuri says no, so Masamune calms down and tries to think of a situation where it wouldn't be embarrassing to ask for Aki's contact information. Tai suddenly announces the school beautification committee lost a member and they need someone to fill the vacancy immediately. So Masamune quickly volunteers himself to get close to Aki. After school, Aki is surprised to see his stupid face there on the committee, but when the other girls start fawning over him, Aki walks away and ignores him completely. Later, Masamune is stuck with the task of cleaning windows and laments how hard it is to impress Aki no matter what he does. He then worries nobody will ever want to date him if they discover he had the body of a truck tire just a few years ago. When he looks down from the ladder, Tai enters and apologizes for pressuring him into something stressful. Masamune assures her it's fine, so she approaches closer and asks if he'd like to go to the movies sometime. Masamune's virgin mind starts imagining the wonders of a first date scenario, but when he remembers his revenge mission, he rejects Tae coldly. Tae says she understands and runs out of the room embarrassed. Then Masamune realizes he's actually popular now, which gives him an ego boost. So Aki appears and asks if the girl who just left was on the committee. Masamune explains she just wanted to talk to him, so Aki sarcastically says it must be nice being so popular with everyone. Masamune realizes his plan is working according to schedule and tells her the only person he wants to go out with is her specifically. Aki very indifferently thanks him, so Masamune seizes the opportunity to ask for her contact information finally. Aki agrees easily, but says her phone is being repaired currently and asks if they can exchange contacts next time they're on duty together. Masamune agrees to wait, but the following week, he ends up waiting alone like a fool. Then he notices a letter telling him where to find the next clue in this scavenger hunt. From there, he follows the trail throughout the entire school building until he ends up right where he started and looks through the window outside. There, Aki reveals a poster that says she refuses his request and walks away laughing. Suddenly, Yoshino appears behind him and says how gullible he is for falling for that. She explains she could easily arrange a date with Aki and gives him her phone number to prove it to him. The next day, Tae announces the whole class will have to do supplementary lessons if there's at least one failing grade on the next test. Tae thinks Masamune won't have problems passing, but Masamune points out Shuri doesn't seem worried at all. At that, Shuri smiles and reveals he only managed single-digit scores on all his midterm exams and hopes to achieve double digits this time, which is pathetically low. Masamune had no idea Shuri was as dumb as he looked on the outside, so he offered to help him study out of pity. Later in the study room, Masamune asks Shuri what he knows about the subjects. But when Shuri gives up immediately, Masamune wonders what kind of bribe he had to pay to get into this school in the first place. At that moment, Shuri proudly explains he's one of the 7 wonders of the school, when Masamune hears a similar conversation happening behind him. He then realizes Aki is also helping Yoshino study, and Masamune is surprised to discover Yoshino's airhead act wasn't just an act after all. Aki mocks Masamune for being confident in teaching someone when he failed at something so simple before. With that, Masamune remembers his conversation with Yoshino, and since he thinks she's on his side, he suggests they make a bet to see if he and Shuri will have a higher score than Aki and Yoshino combined. He insists that if he wins, Aki will have to go on a date with him. When Aki asks what she gains from this, Masamune says she can give him any nickname, and he'll wear it on his back until graduation, which is a huge risk. Interested, Aki adds he'll also have to pay for her lunch until she says it's enough, so Masamune agrees to the terms. Shuri asks Masamune if this was really a good idea, but Masamune concludes that with Yoshino's help, it would be 3 against 1 odds. Later, Aki observes Yoshino studying hard, so Yoshino informs her that Masamune was the first person to get a perfect score on the transfer exam, which is impressive. Yoshino suddenly feels less confident, so she hands Aki a book about dating in case it's necessary for their bet. Aki gets confused but tells Yoshino that wouldn't happen even if the sun came up backwards. Meanwhile, Masamune looks at his phone, wondering if he should call Yoshino for help. But when he realizes it's the first time he's calling a girl, he wonders if he should waste this milestone on an airhead. Fortunately, Yoshino calls him first to save him from this dilemma. So he answers and asks if she'll help him with the bet. However, Yoshino tells him she can't because he made the bet on the spot, and she already had her own plans to help Aki win. The next day, Shuri shows Masamune another single-digit score, so he promises that if all else fails, he'll also make Aki give him an embarrassing nickname. Then Aki and Yoshino approach, and Aki starts asking Masamune questions about possible test topics, and he answers each one without stuttering. Masamune realizes they're practically tied, which means everything will come down to their skills. Afterward, he continues teaching Shuri, who struggles to stay awake during the boring lessons. One night, Aki even sees Masamune teaching Shuri at a cafe and is impressed by how far he'd go for this date. On test day, Masamune asks Shuri if he thinks he'll pass, and Shuri says they're good thanks to Masamune's tutoring. Shuri then suggests they have lunch, so Masamune goes to grab some drinks. When he arrives at the vending machine, he finds Yoshino, who says she's sorry she couldn't help him win. Masamune then admits it was strange to depend on her for a fight he started, so Yoshino offers him her drink and tells him to do his best on the tests. Masamune then wonders why Yoshino would be rooting for him to win. So she mutters that it doesn't matter anymore while she runs away mysteriously. After that, Masamune prepares to eat the lunch his mom made while wondering what that was all about. Later, the test finally begins, and Masamune smiles, seeing the questions he anticipated would appear. However, suddenly he feels a rumble in his stomach ominously. He remembers the moment Yoshino said it doesn't matter anymore, and worries the two-faced witch put laxatives in his coffee. While he writhes in pain, he swears not to let the girls get away unpunished with this sabotage. After the test, Masamune furiously goes to Aki's class to confront her, but ends up chasing the wrong girl by mistake. When he says he was looking for Aki, the girl tells him Aki didn't show up to school because she was sick with a fever. Masamune then wonders why Yoshino would give him laxatives if they had already won by default, when he receives a message from his sister saying the eggs in his lunch were basically poison and not laxatives. A few days later, Shuri tells Masamune to do his best in the supplementary classes. So Masamune wonders how he's the only one stuck in supplementary classes when he sees Aki already waiting in the room. While he sits right next to her, he imagines this already counts as a date, technically. The following Sunday, Masamune leaves for the real date, remembering the call with Yoshino saying Aki was willing to do it. However, when Masamune arrives at the meeting location, he sees Aki in a magical girl cosplay and wonders why the hell she's wearing that ridiculous outfit. At that moment, a sweaty otaku approaches her and asks if he can take a photo of her costume. But Aki has no idea what the weird guy is talking about. Masamune comes to her rescue and scares away the loser, so Aki gives him the nickname Acid Rag for being a disgusting man who saved her. Masamune asks why she's dressed like a character from a coloring book, so 𝐂𝐨𝐴 mocks him for being inexperienced and not knowing she'd wear a costume on their first date to break the ice. After that, Masamune calls Yoshino and asks how the hell 𝐂𝐴𝐴 ended up like this. So Yoshino explains that 𝐂𝐴𝐴 believes everything she says or does without question. That's why Masamune should leave it to her to fix. Masamune asks why she'd go so far to help him, but Yoshino says she needs to go and hangs up mysteriously. Masamune returns to the date and admits he doesn't know the rules of a first date either, but points out 𝐂𝐴𝐴 thinks it's a real date. At that, 𝐂𝐴𝐴 explains Yoshino told her that after he failed his test, they found him trying to cut his wrists, and Yoshino said she was the only one who could save him from suicide. Masamune wonders how he fell into a plot worse than a Fast and Furious movie, but they continue with the date anyway. They go to the cinema that 𝐂𝐴𝐴 rented out completely, but she tells him not to sit too close to her. The movie turns out to be a disturbing horror film, and by the end, 𝐂𝐴𝐴 has difficulty standing up from fear. Next, they go to dinner, and Masamune wonders how she can stuff herself after a movie like that. He then remembers the cruel queen he knew was much more arrogant, but she didn't eat a family's weekly food supply in one sitting. He asks if it's something she was born with, so she explains it started when something terrible happened in her past that she won't elaborate on. At that moment, a little girl approaches and asks 𝐂𝐴𝐴 why she looks like a little lamb in that outfit. 𝐂𝐴𝐴 then makes a scene while trying to explain herself, so Masamune drags her outside before she embarrasses herself even more. Outside, Masamune finally tells 𝐂𝐴𝐴 that cosplay introduction dates aren't a real thing that normal people do. 𝐂𝐴𝐴 gets sad, so she goes to a nearby store to change out of the costume. While there, she realizes how embarrassed she is and screams, causing Masamune to burst in on her in her underwear by accident. 𝐂𝐴𝐴 then punches him, causing a coma where he relives the memories of when it happened before. Later, Masamune wakes up in 𝐂𝐴𝐴's lap while lying on a park bench. When 𝐂𝐴𝐴 realizes he's awake, she pushes him off and says she's going home. But before leaving, Masamune apologizes for scaring her earlier. On the way home, Masamune calls Yoshino, who tells him she's helping because of 𝐂𝐴𝐴. She imagines 𝐂𝐴𝐴 could become more humble if Masamune breaks up with her, which would also benefit her position. Masamune then points out her roundabout plan was a bit excessive, but when Yoshino says she doesn't know what he's talking about, Masamune simply says he looks forward to working with her and calls her master. Later at home, Masamune reads a cliché romance manga where the main character tells his ugly crush he doesn't mind getting wet in the rain if he can pretend it's her ocean, which is creepy. When he goes to school the next day, he plans to make his revenge a reality with his next scheme. During supplementary classes, Masamune sits next to 𝐂𝐴𝐴 and keeps staring at her fixedly. 𝐂𝐴𝐴 gets irritated and asks why he's still looking, so he responds he only has eyes for her in the cheesiest way possible. After school, it starts raining and 𝐂𝐴𝐴 doesn't have an umbrella, so Masamune hands her his umbrella, saying he doesn't mind getting wet in the rain if he can pretend he's swimming in her ocean, which sounds even creepier out loud. He then runs off, thinking his love bombing plan is working perfectly. That night, Yoshino breaks the news that 𝐂𝐴𝐴 just thinks he's being a weirdo. So she suggests it's time for him to switch things up and tells him to be as cold as possible next time he sees her. When Yoshino returns to the mansion, 𝐂𝐴𝐴 wonders why she took so long, but Yoshino keeps pretending not to understand while she notices Masamune's umbrella. Meanwhile, Masamune consults his seduction Bible and sees the girl usually realizes how she feels when the guy treats her badly, but he worries 𝐂𝐴𝐴 might hate him even more if he does that. The next day, when Masamune sees 𝐂𝐴𝐴, he remembers Yoshino's words and decides to trust her advice. 𝐂𝐴𝐴 tries to return the umbrella to him, but he passes by her coldly without acknowledgement. When he settles into class, he realizes he might have destroyed all the sympathy he'd built up until that moment. But he continues with his plan and ignores 𝐂𝐴𝐴 for the rest of the day. After school, Masamune runs into 𝐂𝐴𝐴 and imagines she must already be missing his cheesy phrases, but she also ignores him completely. He then tries to go after her, but Yoshino's glare warns him not to do anything to ruin the plan. Since then, 𝐂𝐴𝐴 and Masamune continue avoiding each other, but Yoshino notices 𝐂𝐴𝐴 gets more frustrated as the days pass. One night, 𝐂𝐴𝐴 finally confronts Masamune in full cruel princess mode. Masamune tries to run for the hills when 𝐂𝐴𝐴 hits him with her umbrella and prevents him from fleeing. Masamune finally breaks free and runs, but 𝐂𝐴𝐴 pulls him by his tie and reprimands him for being airheaded. But when she calms down, she asks why he was ignoring her. Masamune almost falls in love with her shy face, but maintains the plan and says it was on purpose. 𝐂𝐴𝐴 asks why he would do that, but before Masamune can say he likes her, 𝐂𝐴𝐴 demands to know what he likes about her. All Masamune can think of are the things that make her the devil incarnate, so he simply says he likes everything about her. Aki is almost convinced, so Masamune suddenly runs off to call Yoshino before he screws things up even more. That night, Masamune begs Yoshino to help him think of something to say. So the next day, Masamune shows up with a letter so his big mouth doesn't ruin everything. Before he can put it in her locker, Aki appears, grabs the letter and throws it in the trash. She tells him she despises him and prevents him from explaining while she runs away. Yoshino emerges from the shadows like Batman, so Masamune explains that Aki was acting completely differently from before. Hearing this, Yoshino tells him to leave it to her, explaining that nothing he says will reach her since he can't even explain why he likes her. After Yoshino leaves, Masamune wonders whose revenge this even is anymore, and decides he can't stay out of it. Meanwhile, Aki is at a playground panicking because she's never skipped class before. She then blames Masamune for getting into her head, remembering how she saw him talking with Yoshino after he left her. Aki then throws her umbrella while lamenting she knew it would end like this. At that moment, Yoshino appears and asks Aki if she's sad about him talking with her. Aki gets defensive and claims she couldn't be sad because of a conceited narcissist like him. However, when Yoshino holds her face to comfort her, Aki realizes she's somehow always been so transparent when it comes to this kind of thing. Either way, she insists she'll never be sad over a guy again, remembering the last time she was. While Aki continues her delirious rant, Yoshino assures her Masamune only has eyes for her, and imagines Aki must like him too. Aki tries to deny it, but when she turns around, Yoshino is already gone. After Aki arrives home irritated, she admits she always hurt people so she wouldn't get hurt herself. But now she can't tell if Masamune likes her or not. Suddenly, Masamune calls out for Aki, and a car almost flattens her like a pancake. Fortunately, he pulls her aside in time and asks what happened to her. Aki insists he doesn't care, but Masamune says he doesn't know what he'd do without her. At that moment, Aki lowers her guard and is about to tell Masamune how she feels when they're interrupted by the car owner who almost ran her over. Suddenly, the girl jumps into Masamune's arms and says she's excited to see him. Masamune wonders who this attractive lunatic is, while Yoshino watches them wondering who she is. When she calls his name, Masamune wonders what the hell is happening, but tells her she must be confusing him with someone else. At that moment, her butler says it's time to go, so the girl hopes to see him soon and leaves. Suddenly, Masamune feels Aki's deadly aura behind him while she asks who the girl is. When Masamune says he doesn't know, Aki tells him to die and walks away. The next day at lunch, Masamune braves the lunch rush just to get Aki's favorite orders. Afterward, he takes them to the gym storage room, thinking she couldn't refuse food. But before he can approach, Yoshino appears and starts shooting at him on Aki's orders with paper balls. She then asks what he could have done to make Aki this angry. So Masamune explains the strange situation with the mystery girl. Yoshino shoots him a few more times and reminds him he shouldn't interfere with the plan. Then she flees mysteriously. Masamune decides to do things his way and tries to plan his speech for Aki. But when he imagines her as Darth Vader, he can't enter and just leaves the food at the door. As soon as he leaves, the door opens and Aki grabs the food hungrily. The next day at school, Masamune keeps wondering who the strange girl is and realizes she's actually his type physically. However, he laments that Aki didn't give him a chance to explain the situation. Then the new transfer student enters, and it's Neko who immediately smiles at Masamune creepily. When Neko goes to her seat, the whole class is amazed by how majestic she looks. After class, Masamune tries to talk to Neko, but all the girls surround her and ask about her previous school. He waits until after the next class, but the same thing happens again, and for the rest of the day. Eventually, the other boys get irritated because the girls keep monopolizing Neko. So they try to send Shuri to infiltrate the gang, but Masamune offers to go instead. When Masamune approaches, the girls can't believe how perfect their timing is for a romance. So Tai explains she hadn't even finished revealing she transferred to their school because of him. The girls encourage her to express her feelings. So Neko explains that 3 years ago, she was standing in the cold asking for donations, but everyone ignored her like she was selling tickets to the 4th Thor movie. However, Masamune was the only one to give her a coat and make a donation. When she called out to him, he simply told her to dress warmer, and somehow, he instantly became an angel in her eyes. Masamune wonders what kind of acid she's on, since he was still fat and ugly 3 years ago. However, when even the guys believe the story, Masamune takes Neko to talk privately. On the way, Neko warns Masamune to slow down and suddenly faints and starts bleeding from her mouth. Masamune starts panicking, but when he helps her get up, a ketchup packet falls out and the trick is revealed. Neko assures him at least it's made from natural ingredients, but Masamune barely controls the urge to tape her mouth with duct tape. He asks why she'd tell such a lie when she doesn't know him, so Neko asks him to keep the truth secret between them, even if he doesn't remember her. Masamune almost gives in to how cute she is, but when he remembers his burning hatred for Aki, he rejects Neko and says he already likes someone else. Neko starts crying, but starts asking questions about his crush. When Masamune reveals it's one-sided, Neko asks to see who she is, so he goes up to the classroom and Masamune points at Aki, thinking Neko will give up when she sees how beautiful Aki is. However, Neko whispers she won't be a problem and goes straight to the classroom to introduce herself. Masamune runs to stop her, but before he can, a student opens a window and wind lifts Neko's skirt, causing Masamune and Aki to realize she's not wearing underwear. Afterward, Neko turns to Masamune and explains she's just very conscious of her health down there. But before Masamune can process that weird statement, Aki stands up and leaves the class furious. Masamune runs after her and tries to explain he doesn't know Neko, so he grabs Aki. But when she tries to break free, she ends up punching a teacher who catches them for killing class. Thanks to this, the teacher sentences them to clean the pool after school. After school, Masamune and Aki resume their cleaning tasks, but Aki warns him to stay away from her. Masamune gets irritated with her annoying attitude, so he grabs a hose and soaks her, claiming it was an accident. Aki then takes off her jacket and Masamune observes her lack of curves critically. Suddenly, he realizes she's struggling with a bucket of water while explaining she planned to accidentally spill it on him. Masamune remembers he's not wearing a swimsuit, so she'd soak his underwear, so Aki says he can go without underwear with Neko instead. Suddenly, Aki loses her balance and falls into the pool, and while she struggles, Masamune realizes the idiot doesn't know how to swim at all, so he jumps in after her. As soon as he gets her to a safe place, Aki remembers he didn't want to get wet, so Masamune says his body just moved on its own. When Aki realizes it wasn't more than that, Masamune insists that if he said it was because he liked her, she wouldn't believe him anyway. So he apologizes for going too far. Masamune wonders why he's feeling so irritated with this, when Aki suddenly asks him to prove it. When Masamune asks what would be necessary, Aki tells him to kiss her. Meanwhile, Yoshino waits in the sun because Aki is late. Suddenly, Neko appears and asks if she knows where Masamune is, and Yoshino wonders why Neko is asking her. So Neko says she thought she'd be the best person to ask, but Yoshino insists she doesn't know where he is. Back at the pool, Aki insists kissing her is the least he should be able to do if he likes her, but Masamune freezes because this would ruin his plan for the grand finale. In his vision, Aki would tell him she loves him and go for a kiss, but he'd refuse and leave with his mission complete. When Masamune remains silent, Aki gets angry and tries to leave, so Masamune pulls her closer. He then decides to imagine her as a piece of meat, thinking it would be easier than looking at her face. But when he goes for the kiss, Aki punches him hard. Masamune demands to know what that was, so Aki gets shy, but Masamune demands an explanation. Just then, Aki and other swim team members appear and ask why they're there, so Masamune explains they were fulfilling their punishment when they decided to take a dip. Aki believes the story, and Masamune is glad he escaped another jam. So Aki tells him she's there for swim practice and wishes him good luck with the cleaning. After Aki leaves the pool and says she accepts that he loves her, she then asks, "So what?" and walks away, leaving Masamune furious. Later, Masamune wonders what Aki's problem is, since she asked for the kiss. When Neko appears and says she's been looking for him. When Masamune says he has no energy to go out, Neko pulls out a bottle and serves a hot drink to help him. Curious, Masamune takes a sip and is surprised it's salty, so Neko explains she put the best ingredients to help with dehydration. Masamune likes the drink and drinks more, so Neko starts lecturing about which vitamins and nutrients are important for the body. Masamune says he prefers using exercise and diet before resorting to medications, so Neko agrees that's ideal and pouts cutely. He then asks what she likes about him, thinking he can turn the situation to his favor. Since this was the difficult question Aki asked him, he can barely wait to lecture Neko when she gives a superficial answer because she doesn't really know him. However, Neko tells him she likes the fact he's so modest he doesn't realize his own charms. Masamune is surprisingly attractive, so Neko tells him to be more confident since he's a lovely person and walks away. Masamune realizes she's harder than he thought, so he wonders if he needs to be as used as she is. Meanwhile, Yoshino observes Neko secretly, hoping to eliminate her at the root because she's too dangerous. She then follows her to a neighborhood where she loses her trail. There, Neko's butler asks Yoshino what she wants with Neko. so Yoshino switches to airhead mode. Neko appears and says Yoshino is an acquaintance who works for Aki, but when Yoshino insists she doesn't know anything, Neko tells her to drop the act. Yoshino then asks why she's so obsessed with Masamune, so Neko says he saved her in the past, but Yoshino doesn't believe it. Later, Masamune goes home planning to use Neko's phrase on Aki. However, when he enters, he hears more noise than normal and is shocked to find Neko and Yoshino cooking with his micro-mom. Masamune concludes he must have entered the wrong house, but remembers his dear mommy installed a security system. So he has no choice but to accept reality. He immediately grabs Yoshino and goes upstairs to ask what's happening. Turns out Masamune's mom found the girls in the neighborhood, and when she realized they studied at the same school as him, she forced them to come in with her. Masamune apologizes for his mom's empty skull, but tells Yoshino they should leave while he hides evidence of his fat past. Yoshino points out his room made it clear he only thought about working out, so Masamune insisted he couldn't take breaks on the path to becoming an attractive guy. At that moment, Neko enters the room and calls his rehabilitation incredible, but Masamune quickly pushes her out and asks what she needs. Neko then says the food is ready. When he goes downstairs, he sees they're all covered in calories again. There, Masamune's sister says she's surprised he'd actually let his friends come to their house. And when Neko asks why, the little gossip almost reveals his secret about his past as a calorie person. Masamune then changes the subject to keep his sister's mouth shut, and his mom suggests everyone eat. Masamune peels the shrimp while Neko takes out a ton of medications to take before eating. His mummy tells them they should enjoy their meals, but Masamune laments the calories are a problem while Neko insists nutrients are important. Fortunately, his mummy has no problems with Yoshino, who's willing to stuff herself. Chinatsu then suggests releasing some fireworks afterward, and the girls agree with the idea. Moments later, Chinatsu wears a yukata while they release fireworks. So Masamune is at least grateful she managed to get Neko out of the house. Yoshino tells Masamune she doesn't like fireworks because Aki once used her as a guinea pig to test how many fireworks are needed to fly to the moon. Masamune feels sorry for her, so he prepares some snake fireworks for her to watch. He then sees Neko helping Chinatsu with her kimono and can't help but notice how cute she looks. Neko joins him and says she's never had so much fun. So the quiet mummy brings a watermelon as a snack. Chinatsu suggests they do a watermelon smashing contest, so Yoshino joins them and Neko laughs at how ridiculous they look. Masamune realizes they could have had a different relationship if Neko wasn't such a liar, and he didn't want revenge against Aki. Later, Neko changes upstairs when she finds Masamune's room again. When she finishes, Masamune walks her out and hopes she never comes back. Then he asks Yoshino if she needs him to walk her home. Yoshino reminds him that would give Aki the wrong idea, so he walks her to a main road where she can catch a taxi. There, Yoshino warns Masamune not to get involved in Neko's schemes. Meanwhile, on her way home, Neko holds Masamune's chubby photo and insists they're more alike than he thinks. A few days later, students celebrate as summer vacation officially begins. At that moment, Aki enters the classroom and slams a flyer on Masamune's desk, asking what he's trying to do by inviting her to the beach. But Masamune thinks since they won't have classes for 40 days, he'll adopt a more aggressive approach thanks to what he learned from Neko. However, Aki tells him she already has plans to stay at the island villa and invites Shuri instead. But since Shuri is a spineless submissive, he insists he doesn't want to go unless Masamune goes with him. Masamune uses this to his advantage and insists they're a package deal. So Neko is inspired by him and insists if Masamune goes, she goes too. Out of nowhere, Tai says she'd love to join them. So Masamune asks Aki if she'd prefer to take all of them or spend time at her private beach alone. Cornered, Aki thinks carefully and agrees. A few days later, the group heads to the island on a ship, so Yoshino approaches Masamune when he's alone. She explains she's been researching Neko but can't find anything promising about her, so she doesn't know why she's obsessed with him. Masamune doesn't know what to do with this information, but he assures Yoshino his only goal is revenge against Aki, so Neko won't be a problem. However, Yoshino isn't convinced, so she warns if he doesn't do something about Aki on the trip, she'll tell everything to Aki. Later, the group arrives at the villa and is impressed by how incredible it is. But Masamune is too busy wondering if Yoshino will really reveal his disguise. Aki tells the guys that her father's secretary Saki will be their chaperone and has already arrived before them. Meanwhile, Saki was ending her long-term relationship for being a bit bipolar and somewhat crazy. At that moment, the maid announces Aki has arrived, so Saki goes to meet her thinking she's the only one who can comfort her. However, when she comes out to greet the girls, she notices Masamune and asks Aki what a boy is doing there. Masamune realizes he has no time to waste, and since Aki likes to show off in front of other women, he blurts out he's dating Aki. Aki throws her suitcase at him and warns him not to tell lies that would shock the devil. But Saki tells Aki it's good she got over her phase of hating men. She praises her for choosing a handsome boyfriend and suggests it might help with her lack of chest development. At that, Aki plays along and says she didn't want to make a big fuss about it. Afterward, she pulls Masamune inside. Aki reprimands Masamune for putting her in an awkward situation, but Masamune is grateful for understanding the situation correctly and for the sexy secretary collaborating. Aki then tells Masamune the agreement is for when they're on the island and warns him not to overdo the act. Later, Masamune shows off his abs to impress the girls, but everyone is more focused on ties diving in the ocean. Masamune is glad Shuri didn't wear a bikini at the beach, but Shuri insists he's a boy, at least on the outside. Neko then grabs Masamune and asks him to apply sunscreen, but Masamune worries his progress with Aki would be ruined if she catches him staring at Neko's breasts. Suddenly, Aki separates them and tells Neko to stop doing cheap tricks on her boyfriend. She then points out that if Saki sees this, she'd think Masamune was an unfaithful scumbag and Neko was being deceived, which wouldn't be good for their families. Neko agrees to back off, so Aki grabs Masamune and takes him somewhere private to fulfill his boyfriend duties. When they're completely alone, he wonders if she wants to get wet without water, but Aki actually tells him to get some food from Saki, since there's no point pretending when nobody can see them. Cornered, Masamune goes home determined to find something to take his plan a step forward. He then finds Saki and asks her to make lunch for Aki. Next, Masamune asks if there's any fun place on the island, so Saki starts listing clubs and lounges they could try. But Masamune asks her to keep the suggestions age-appropriate. Saki then suggests a test of courage, and when Masamune remembers how bad Aki is with scary things, he thinks it's the perfect plan. After Masamune thanks her and leaves, but when he departs, Saki's true intentions to ruin Aki's chance at love are revealed. The year she was first hired by the Atagaki family, she had just been rejected by another suitor who didn't get along well with her eccentric behavior. When she heard Aki crying on a nearby bench, Saki asked what happened to the donut-shaped boy she was playing with. So Aki explained he left and insisted she didn't need anyone else like him. Since then, Saki enjoyed seeing Aki follow the dark path of hating men. That's why she now hated the idea of her loving a handsome guy like Masamune. That night, the group arrives at an abandoned house where only Tai seems suspiciously happy to be there. Masamune pulls pieces of paper to determine how they enter, so the group receives numbers from 1 to 6. Afterward, Masamune watches happily while Yoshino enters, knowing the entry order had been completely manipulated so Aki would get too scared to move, and he'd be next to enter and save her. In his fantasy, she'd wish he was her boyfriend forever and initiate the kiss. Later inside the house, Saki waits patiently for Masamune, hoping to scare him with her ghost face mask, so Aki sees how pathetic he is and stops loving him. Suddenly, a psychopath with a hockey mask and a chainsaw appears and starts chasing Saki's ghost face. Saki then runs past Aki, who faints from fear. When Masamune arrives, he wonders who the ghost face threat is, but when she screams, he realizes it's Saki. Saki continues her terrified escape while running out of the house, not wanting to die so nobody discovers her true identity. However, she suddenly encounters Neko, who seems to be bleeding from her mouth again. So she runs the other way and ends up hitting a post hard. Later, Saki wakes up and finds Masamune carrying her. There, Masamune apologizes for involving her in his plans while admitting he and Aki aren't really dating. Saki realizes Masamune is a good guy after all. So Masamune tells her not to tell Aki she knows. Afterward, upon returning to the mainland, Yoshino approaches Masamune and praises him for finally having a decent plan. She thinks Neko must finally understand the situation, so she agrees not to tell Aki, but warns him not to lower his guard. A few days later, Masamune tortures himself with his usual exercise routine when he suddenly receives a call from Aki. Later, he meets with Yoshino and tells her Aki wants to personally deliver some luggage he forgot on the island. When Masamune starts feeling conceited, Yoshino warns him to think more carefully about it, because one single mistake can set him back even further. Afterward, Masamune goes home to do some homework when he realizes his pig photo is missing. He then remembers the other day when Neko came over and concludes she must be responsible. The next day, Masamune thanks Aki for returning his things personally, so she explains she would have delivered them, but Saki started asking too many questions. Aki then warns Masamune he'll regret it if he continues getting close to her, which reminds him of how she used to be years ago. Suddenly, he realizes Nico must be able to tell the girl in the photo is Aki, and the potato with eyes is him. Aki tries to talk to Masamune, but he's too busy wondering why Neko would steal his photo and not say anything about it. Aki then yells at Masamune that she'll leave happily since it's so uncomfortable for him to talk to her. After being left behind, Masamune realizes this was exactly the kind of thing Yoshino had warned about, so it wouldn't be a good idea to leave things as they are. Soon after, he receives a call from Neko, who says she's home alone, so he asks if he can go there. Later, Masamune arrives outside her apartment, and Nico greets him excitedly. Masamune gets nervous when he realizes this would be his first official time inside a girl's apartment, but he gathers courage and enters. Inside, Masamune sees how impressive the apartment is, so Nico casually says it's a secondary residence her father uses for work. She then asks what brought Masamune there so suddenly, but the idiot hadn't even thought of an excuse for showing up. He says he was just in the neighborhood, so Neko accepts since she's thirstier than a single person on Tinder. Masamune suddenly asks to use the bathroom, so Neko tells him it's at the end of the hallway. But instead of going there, he hides in one of the rooms he imagines is Nico's because of all the pills everywhere. When he looks around, he sees many erotic romance things, which would explain why she's not right in the head. Then he finds the same manga he uses as his conquest guide. Suddenly, Neko appears behind him and asks if finding the bathroom was too difficult. She then notices the manga and admits she asked the butler to find the same one after seeing it in his room. Masamune realizes she just admitted she snuck into his room, so he asks if she by chance also took a photo of him. Neko admits to taking photos of his pleasure mounds, saying she can't help it because he was too cute. Masamune is shocked to hear this, so he reminds her he looked like a walking meatball, but she holds his hand while saying there's nothing wrong with being overweight. At that moment, Masamune completely lowers his guard and she kisses him. When Masamune doesn't resist, she pushes him into a baby-making position, assuring him the butler will be out all day. Masamune starts wondering if his revenge even matters anymore, but when he remembers all the cruel things Aki did to him, including the final blow where she called him pig's foot, he gets even more irritated. At that moment, he tells Neko he was bullied for being fat and having a bad personality, and people only approached him because he was rich. Next, he points out Neko couldn't genuinely like him, so he wouldn't like to continue with someone who isn't serious. Masamune grabs the photo and starts leaving, so Neko asks if he's choosing Aki, to which Masamune reveals it's his revenge. Afterward, Masamune feels horrible while Neko cries alone in her room. The next day, Masamune meets with the group, looking like he got chewed up and spit out. Shuri points out he seems to have lost weight again, but Masamune doesn't care. Shuri then says the only person missing is Neko, so Masamune worries about how awkward it would be to see her. But Tai informs the group she won't be coming. The group enters the park and everyone has a lot of fun, except Masamune, who still feels terrible. Afterward, he meets with Yoshino and she says Aki was somewhere devouring ice cream like her life depended on it. She then asks why Aki seems to be acting strangely, but Masamune vaguely remembers Aki getting irritated when the rest of the group catches up and starts heading home. The group is about to go home when Neko's butler arrives driving and goes straight to Masamune. She tells the group Neko disappeared and asks Masamune what he did with her since she wasn't at the apartment that morning. Masamune wonders what the big deal is, so the butler reveals she left behind all her convulsion control medications. Masamune asks if she's sick, so the butler points out no normal person would need all the medicine she takes, making Masamune remember all the strange things Neko did and realize it wasn't an act. He then realizes she tricked them on purpose, so they wouldn't think she was weak. The butler asks Masamune what he did with her, since she knows he was at the apartment the day before. The whole group is shocked, including Aki, so Masamune explains he formally told Neko he couldn't date her because he chose Aki. However, everyone ignores Masamune's dramatic confession and starts thinking of ways to find Neko. Aki suggests the butler take them closer to the apartment. Afterward, she tells Yoshino to stay in the car to go with Masamune, since he obviously knows where the apartment is. The rest of the group heads to the car, so Yoshino tells him she can't believe he went to Nico's apartment and also gets in the car. Masamune can't believe he mattered so little to Aki, but he decides to focus on Nico. Meanwhile, the rest of the group searches the area near her apartment, but after hours of searching, Yoshino informs Masamune they still haven't found her. With that, Masamune deduces there's still one place to look and ends up at their school, where he ends up finding Aki again. Masamune almost thinks he's dreaming, but her flat chest and foul mouth bring him back to reality. Masamune explains that since she traveled by car, the school was the only place she'd know well, but Aki says she already looked everywhere without success. So Masamune asks why they let Aki continue without a prince. Masamune then realizes he needs to tell Yoshino to let Kanetsugu go. But when he sees her on stage as an elf, he tells Mary there's no way to reach her. Suddenly he thinks of a crazy way to save the play and asks Neko for help, so she runs quickly. Moments later, Masamune goes backstage and makes a crazy suggestion to Mary to save the play. Meanwhile, the play reaches the point where Snow White needs a prince to kiss her back to life. Aki thinks nobody is coming and thinks it's a realistic ending, while she remembers the bouquet of flowers she found outside her window years ago. But even though she waited and waited, her prince never came. Suddenly, Masamune enters the stage in costume, making everyone wonder what's happening. In his earlier conversation with Mary, she had reminded him their classes were enemies. But Masamune explained he didn't think their production deserved to be destroyed. So his action was genuinely for the sake of art. Now on stage, Masamune tries to buy time for the elves to organize and finally accept him as prince, but Masamune ends up stumbling weakly. The elves run to help him, while Mary wonders why the prince is so weak. Kanetsugu then appears and explains Masamune's fever must be quite high, so he's not trying to ruin the play intentionally. Soon after, Masamune manages to stand up and tries to get to Aki. But when he starts stumbling, Yoshino gives him a final push and threatens him to finish the job. Masamune thinks he just needs to say his last line and kiss her. So he tries to find strength while Aki wonders why he's taking so long to fake a kiss. Masamune then rushes through his line and kisses Aki to the shock of the entire theater. Aki punches Masamune and the curtains close, so the crowd starts applauding while Kanetsugu finally manages to leave. The next day, Sonoka announces Aki's class won the competition, but Masamune and Aki received the Best Hero and Heroine awards. Tae cries, lamenting having to cancel the play because Masamune went to the infirmary afterward. So 𝐂𝐚𝐭𝐨 reminds her he offered to play their prince, but she rejected him for being too fat. Sonoka then suggests they settle the festival things with a karaoke battle, so Tai accepts and says the losers will have to pay the entire bill. The battle begins and students take turns singing from the heart. Aki makes a Grammy-worthy performance, and Neko chooses to sing a song about romantic disillusionment. Sonoka realizes Masamune seems tense, so she thinks it's finally her chance to show Aki how pathetic he really is. When Masamune tries to escape, Sonoka and 𝐂𝐚𝐭𝐨 stop him and insist he sing. So Aki comes to his rescue and tells the girls not to pressure him. Masamune thanks her, but she returns to her usual way. However, when Aki returns, she hears the theme song of her favorite show. Neko then suggests they sing a duet, and for the first time, the girls have fun singing together, impressing the rest of the group. Unfortunately, their rivalry returns when they disagree about which character is the best. Finally, it's Masamune's turn to strain his vocal cords, so he decides to give it his all, but ends up damaging everyone's eardrums instead with terrible singing. Afterward, Aki and Masamune sit on a park bench while they wait for Yoshino to finish shopping. Aki asks why Masamune didn't go home like everyone else. And he says he'll go home when Yoshino returns, since it's dangerous for a girl to be alone late at night, just like last time. Masamune points out she'll never thank him for this. So Aki says he's the one who does what he wants, like at the cultural festival. She then asks what he wants her to do to thank him. Masamune fears this might be a trap, but he asks for a kiss anyway. Surprisingly, Aki agrees and tells him to close his eyes, so she approaches, but ends up filling his mouth with her dessert. When he opens his eyes, he sees Yoshino and Aki, who tells him to be grateful she gave him some of her dessert. When she leaves, Yoshino tells Masamune if he had acted instead of waiting, he could have gotten his revenge. She calls him an idiot and walks away. However, Masamune doesn't care if he plans to make Aki fall in love with him on the class trip to France. The next morning, Masamune was practicing awful speeches in front of his bedroom mirror when Chinatsu burst in abruptly to tell him to control himself so he doesn't embarrass all of Japan while in France. When his mom came to invite him to breakfast, he pushed the two women out of his room and glared at his book while starting to plan his revenge against Aki. A few minutes later, Masamune arrived at a prestigious museum in France along with the other students. And everything was going well until Aki arrived with her fiancé, who immediately started making arrogant faces at Masamune. Masamune then saw several couples in the area embracing, and it got him excited because he realized France was the best place to advance his death or love plan, which was to make Aki fall in love with him just to leave her immediately. From so much excitement, he started speaking all the dumb French he knew until Aki interrupted him to ask if she could talk to him during the free intervals on the trip. Masamune was surprised when she made a typical tsundere complaint while walking away. When he tried to follow her, he bumped into a French girl named Muriel. When he told her he was a Japanese student, she held his face and claimed he was the one she was looking for. She later introduced herself to Aki and Masamune as a second-year student who loved anime and manga. She also revealed she aspired to be a romance manga artist someday. But when she showed the manga she was working on, they realized she was more clueless than the author of Rent a Girlfriend. Muriel then begged Masamune to model for her manga, and he tried to refuse until he realized she had big melons looking right at him. When he started to give in, Aki reminded him of their agreement, causing him to refuse Muriel, saying he intended to spend free time with Aki. A few minutes later, Aki and Masamune were walking down the street, and when Aki realized Masamune was holding her hand, she pushed him to a corner where he collided with a runaway character from Men in Black. They were eventually surrounded by other suspicious-looking men, and Masamune tried to use some French without success to save them before the group leader showed them a recording of Muriel's rich brother called Frank, who told them they could only save themselves by becoming romantic comedy models for Muriel. Sometime later, Masamune explained the situation to Yoshino aboard a speedboat. and she agreed to help with his plan so nobody would interfere. The next day, Masamune and Aki met Muriel, and it didn't take long for Masamune to start showing off his otaku knowledge, telling Muriel that romance manga should end when the couple confesses their feelings to each other. However, Muriel said she didn't care about that and started giving him a suspicious demonstration of a love confession scene from her manga until Aki separated them. Aki then took control and told Muriel she'd show how romantic comedy characters should behave, but soon realized she was even more ignorant about romance than Muriel. Meanwhile, Yoshino was guiding Kanetsugu elsewhere, so he wouldn't ruin Aki's date with Masamune. And suddenly, he interrupted the trip to ask her if she was hiding something from him. She tried to maintain her facade, claiming she just wanted to spend time with him, but he said he wouldn't fall for her lies and called her a traitorous little witch while showing a photo of the fist bump she shared earlier with Masamune. Kanetsugu mentioned Yoshino's family serving Aki were well known for betrayals, so he asked if what she was doing could be considered going against her master's wishes, since he was Aki's fiancé. However, Yoshino stood up and told him to rat her out if he wanted. As she walked away, Kanetsugu said he had no intention of telling Aki about her betrayal, but rather her parents, and Yoshino stopped immediately upon hearing this. He started making a cliché villain speech about how bad Yoshino was, but Yoshino interrupted, saying she was only doing what she was doing because Kanetsugu wasn't worthy of Aki. She added she thought he was untrustworthy since the day he appeared at Aki's house, so he asked sarcastically how he was untrustworthy since his documents were real, and Yoshino claimed he was just acting like Aki was precious to him. But before she could say more, a past version of herself appeared in her mind and reminded her that if she spoke more, her secret could be revealed. Kanetsugu started bragging about silencing her, and then he made the situation worse by showing messages on his phone that revealed her parents were angry she had missed work. That's the end of today's video, folks. If you made it this far, you're a real one. Smash that like button and subscribe to Curious Nerd for more anime recaps that don't pull any punches. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop our next breakdown. And hey, drop a comment below telling us which anime we should cover next. We actually read every single one, and your suggestions might become our next video. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay curious, stay nerdy, and we'll catch you in the next one.